Good afternoon, and welcome to the EIM Governing Body meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx chat panel by using the associated icon located on the bottom right corner of your screen. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. Go to the layout icon on the top right corner of your WebEx screen. Select Hide Participants with your video off from the list of options in the drop-down menu. If you require any technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Anita Decker, Chair of the EIM Governing Body. Please go ahead.
You're on mute. Great. Thank you, Decker. Let me go ahead with the roll call, and I'll start with you, Chair Decker.
Here.
Vice Chair Konzioka.
Here.
Member Fong.
Here.
Member Gardner.
Here.
And Member Prescott.
Here.
Thank you, all present, and we do have a quorum and may proceed. Back to you, Chair Decker.
Thank you, Roger. So I want to welcome everybody to our meeting today, and we've got a number of things on the agenda. So we're going to go through the CEO report, the Board of State Regulators, the Regional Issues Forum updates, and then we have two decisional items: the EIM Governance Review Committee Phase 2 documentations, and then the Sub-Entity Scheduling Coordinator role. As we typically do we will also have a briefing of the Western Eim Benefits, a resource sufficiency enhancement with the DMM and ISO staff, and then we've got our informational reports. And if there's anything in the informational reports that any of the governing bodies want to pull out for discussion towards the end of the agenda, please let me know. Before we get started, are there any public comments not related to our agenda today? So I'll pause a minute if there are any public comments not on the agenda.
As a reminder, if you'd like to make a comment and using the WebEx audio, you may enter the comment queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment. If you'd like to make a comment and if you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment.
Okay, hearing no public comments, I'm going to turn it back to Roger for approval of our minutes.
Great, thank you, Chair Decker. We have two sets of minutes, and the first set was prior to Jennifer joining the EIM governing body, so I'm going to do these in two separate motions. So we need a motion to approve the general session EIM governing body minutes from June 30th, 2021.
I'll move that. This is Rob.
I'll second. Oh, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, John, did you second that?
I did.
Thank you. And so I will go ahead and take the vote, and Jennifer, I'll read your name, but I presume you will abstain. Chair Decker?
Approved.
Member Fong?
Yes.
Member Gardner?
I abstain.
Vice Chair Konzioka?
Yes.
And Member Prescott?
Yes.
Thank you, governing body. That motion passes. And then we need a motion to approve the August 30th, 2021 joint session minutes, for which the governing body's role in that joint session. And can I have a motion for that, for those minutes, please?
So moved. This is John.
Second.
This is Val. I'll second.
Thank you. And your votes, please. Chair Decker?
Aye.
Member Fong?
Aye.
Member Gardner?
Aye.
Vice Chair Konziolka?
Aye.
And Member Prescott?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Decker.
Thank you, Roger, again. I'd like to turn it over to our Executive Officer and CEO, Elliot Mainzer, for the CEO report.
Thank you, Chair Decker, members of the governing body. It's great to see everybody this afternoon. I'm sure looking forward to a chance to finally do one of these in person. It's been a long haul with the pandemic. I hope you're all doing well. I wanted to just highlight a few of the key points from my CEO report that was sent on September 1st. Starting out with summer reliability. I think we're about 2/3 the way through summer, counting down every day. As you can imagine, it's been a long and intense summer. Fortunately, we have not had any major extended extreme heat events since early July. We have, of course, had a lot of fires, but the bulk electric system has held up pretty well. I think, as many of you know, we did end up deploying some fairly extraordinary tools this summer, including the ISO's capacity procurement mechanism, allowing us to buy some additional capacity for July, August, and September. But really, I think coming out of July 9th, I think seeing just how extraordinary the conditions were in the West with the fire and the drought and just the hydro conditions, I think many of you know that in late July, Governor Newsom did declare an emergency proclamation, which gave us access to some additional tools during very extreme events, including some access to backup generation and some additional demand response. I think it was important to me to note that those tools were in part developed not only to help California out, but just to try to mitigate impacts on adjacent systems as well. We are part of the vastly interwoven market, and everything that happens in California impacts others and vice versa. And I also just wanted to point out that, operational coordination with adjacent system operators has just been a key part of our operation this summer. Just this morning, we've been on the phone with our partners in Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico. It's a hot day across the West. We actually declared our first flex alert in several weeks. Looks like things are going to be okay. But this coordination and constantly checking in on each other, making sure we understand the load resource balance in adjacent regions, and looking out for each other's reliability is really critical. We only succeed when we're all able to keep the lights on. So that coordination and communication has been an important part of operations this summer, and we will continue that going forward. This has been a disruptive summer with respect to fires. I think you've seen, significant impacts on the bulk electrical system from fires going back to, on July 9th, that bootleg fire in Oregon took out 3 of the 4 major lines in the AC system coming into California and resulted in a significant derate of the DC system as well. Later in the summer, there was another significant fire in British Columbia. The Pine Pass fire resulted in major disruption of the BC hydro operation. The South Fire in Southern California, the Dixie Fire, just a monster of a fire, significant impacts on the local area in Plumas County, Caribou Island. It's been a disruptive summer, and it's really forced us to try to increase the state awareness across the West, particularly through our RC function of giving system operators across the West visibility into where these fires are, how they may be impacting the bulk electric system. And, we still have a lot of fire system ahead of us. Fortunately, no additional rotating outages, but we're going to have to be ever vigilant as things continue to be very dry and quite windy coming into the fall as well. All of us at the ISO continue to just feel super positive about the vote on August 20th on joint authority. Just another round of deep appreciation to Therese, Hampton, and the entire GRC crew and all the other stakeholders across the West who contributed to that. I think very important milestone. It was just so rewarding to see the level of support that they had been able to pull together for that proposal, and the positive energy in the room that morning, I think, was just palpable, and we're just excited to build on that. And of course, today's items with respect to the changes to the governance documents is important, and we're just really looking forward to what I think is going to be a very productive fall as we really lean into the next round of opportunities with our many stakeholders across the West. So thanks again to the governing body members for your support. It's a fabulous outcome. Two of our, extremely important and in many ways related initiatives, the sufficiency test enhancements and the wheel-through issue are continuing, I think, move in a positive direction. The sufficiency test issues that came out of last summer, I continue to emphasize how important, how foundational they are to maintaining trust in the EIM market. Of course, our approach to this has been a couple of phases. The first phase of changes focused on improvements to the accuracy and transparency of the resource sufficiency evaluation, and then the subsequent phase will continue to focus on reevaluating the consequences for failure of an EIM entity to pass the evaluation. I think there's consensus among the team that breaking those things into two phases makes sense. Also, just wanted to note something I think is quite important. I've heard it. The transparency and visibility and oversight of sufficiency tests, I think, are very important. We know our stakeholders have been asking for additional reporting and data. And so our latest proposal also moves the reporting role for the sufficiency test performance from the ISO to the Department of Market Monitoring, who will then monitor the efficiency and effectiveness of the sufficiency test along with the broader ISO market. And the DMM is going to be providing quarterly EIM performance briefings to the EIM governing body. I think that's an important change. I think transparency and just deep insight into the sufficiency test is really important, and we want to make sure folks feel that they're getting a really even playing field on the look at that test. So I think that's an important change. I'm looking forward to continuing to reestablish trust on those dimensions. And then, of course, on the broader issue of wheel-throughs, the initiative there is formally known as the External Load Forward Scheduling Rights Process Initiative. It's got a long title, but I think we all know the wheel-through issues, particularly important to the EIM community. I wanted to just start by thanking the many folks who've showed up in our stakeholder process. It's just lots of really good ideas, a lot of creativity. This is an initiative where we really wanted to take some time up at the front end to really soak in all the good ideas and make sure we got everybody's perspectives on the table, help us really frame the problem, frame the solutions. And I think that's been successful so far. I've been quite encouraged to see that there appears to be, I think, a reasonable level of alignment amongst parties both within California and outside of California around the general outlines of the solution, kind of a forward subscription model for transmission capacity on the ISO system. This is actually not only consistent with what most traditional OAT utilities will do with their native load and their capacity, but also after some due diligence, similar to what other ISOs and RTOs do. We've looked at SPP and MISO and PJM, and this is a similar process that's used there while still maintaining the real economic benefits of the security-constrained economic dispatch. So between now and next May, we're going to be working hard for kind of phase one. We'll really focus on sort of near-term enhancements that can take place by next summer, particularly doing things that can provide greater transparency and risk mitigation for market participants. And then that phase two will focus on really the long-term holistic and durable framework for establishing that scheduling priorities in the market and also bridging some of the key seams issues between the ISO market paradigm and the open access transmission tariff paradigm that many others operate in. So excited about this. Really want to just emphasize again our just unequivocal commitment to taking this issue up with all our creativity and focus, and really again appreciate everybody working with us to try to develop that long-term durable solution for that issue. We'll hear a little bit more about Western EIM performance and benefits later today, so I won't touch much on that, but it was a smashing quarter, 132 million in benefits. Great to see that. And just adding more members just adds more liquidity, more opportunity. And then finally, on the communications front, this is just a topic that's obviously been front and center for us, and I think has paid a lot of dividends this summer already. A lot of additional communication with the governor's office, the CPUC, the Energy Commission, and the legislative folks within California, just providing that visibility and bringing that sense of urgency, I think, contributed to the new tools that we've been able to get for extreme events. Some significant updates to our website. I think many of you have now seen added some new trend charts to today's Outlook page on resource adequacy capacity. We'll continue to be putting out heat bulletins as necessary and just keeping up to date on system conditions. And then finally, I hope you all get a chance to take a look at our relatively new Energy Matters blog. This is something we're putting a lot of energy into, just not only providing insights into very sort of ISO-specific topics, but really the broader evolution of the Western market and issues that are affecting all of us in the Western interconnection. It's a pretty diverse little set of articles. We try to get a lot of different voices into the mix and just wanting to sort of give folks good insights into what's happening and also bring those other voices into the mix as well. So busy times, lots going on. Excited for the conversation today. To Member Gardner, again, great to have you on board. Full deck here, and we're just excited for the opportunities ahead this fall and beyond. And thank you all for your support and input. And that's all for me.
All right.
Happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Any questions for Elliot? Rob?
Yeah, go ahead. Rob?
Elliot, thank you for the report. I have two questions. One is, if you can, and I realize we're still in early September, and but batteries have gone into service, and it's been significantly increased during the middle of summer. Can you make any comments about their performance during August?
Yeah. The battery fleet, the operating battery fleet on our system in general has performed exceptionally well. It's been amazing. They really have been lined up, fully charged, ready for duty. The net peak period has really benefited from that additional capacity. There's been a few growing pains here and there, and some supply chain issues, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we're thinking right now that we should have approximately 3,000 megawatts of batteries on the system by the end of the year, which would be a pretty big chunk. And of course, over the course of the next couple of years, we expect an even significantly greater push as we really try to restabilize around net peak capacity issues. So far, I think things have been working fabulous, and I would say the battery storage industry have been great partners and very sensitive and very receptive to our needs. And through our broader storage enhancement initiatives, we're now really taking the next step in terms of market enhancements to really unleash their full value.
Thank you. Elliot, my second question deals with the wheel-through initiative, and yes, it is planned to be done through next May, and there's been, as you noted, good progress made. Do you believe there'll be enough progress made, say, by sometime this fall, early fall time frame, that would give all the participants a good feel or understanding of what that will look like, such that they can get ready and be moving forward with their next summer operation plans?
Yes, I thank you for the question. I think the answer to that is yes. I do think so. I think I think we're going to find that for the longer term solution that we're not going to have to reinvent the wheel entirely. I think there's a lot of operating history there and some traditional tools that we can deploy in the ISO context. And I think folks have, we've now since early August, we've worked through the existing rules. Fortunately, we have not had any curtailments of priority wheel-throughs so far, as you've seen. And I think the folks understand the current rules. And there are some ideas that have been advanced by market participants for some things that can make that even stronger going into next summer. And we're going to lean in and try to get those in place before next summer. So I do think there will be that visibility and that understanding. I think we'll be in a better place, hopefully with the relationships even stronger.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita.
Any other questions from the governing body for Elliot? Elliot, thank you, and thank you to your staff. Of course, we're all watching many of the initiatives that are going on and are on the calls and listening to the stakeholder feedback as well, and we share your perspective at this point. So thank you for your work and the staff's work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Continuing to move along, I believe we have the Oregon Commissioner Chair and Chair of the Board of State Regulators, Letha Tawney, to provide a Board of State Regulators update. Is Letha on the line?
Good afternoon. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, Commissioner, go ahead.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to provide another Boster update to the governing body. For the record, my name is Letha Tawney, and I serve as a commissioner on the Oregon Public Utility Commission and as the Boster chair. My last update to you was on June 30th, and I'm so pleased to be here today. A lot of very positive things have happened since June, and as we just heard, we have also seen the system reliability sort of hold together, which has also been fantastic as we move through the rest of the summer. First, I want to congratulate Member Gardner on her appointment to the governing body. Many of us have had the good fortune to work with Jennifer in her former roles and have benefited from her expertise on organized energy markets and governance. I personally have learned a great deal. I think you're a great addition to the governing body, and I look as I look across the top of my screen at the 5 members of the body today, I just know that the EIM continues to be in really excellent hands, really engaged body members, and really appreciate that for all of you. The Boster looks forward to working with Jennifer and all of you as we go through some really challenging stakeholder initiatives and policy changes in the coming years. I want to also just note the changes that happened with the Joint Authority. We're so pleased that this body and the CAISO Board of Governors have approved the GRC's proposal for Joint Authority. Now, Member Fong, I know that you served on the GRC alongside Commissioner Raper from the Boster and 12 other stakeholder representatives, and you just put an enormous amount of hard work into that series of proposals that were recommended and approved. And so I want to really call out and thank you for that, and thank the rest of the GRC for that commitment to seeing through the process to a very positive conclusion. I think I don't underestimate what that Joint Authority model approval represents. It's a really significant and positive change in process, but also in culture. And I think joint meetings, providing the opportunity for joint briefings, dialogue between the CAISO board and you as a governing body will really, I think, support holistic decision-making and allow for further engagement and a deeper understanding of the challenges inside California and outside, and where there are likely a lot of common interests. I think this will benefit the market in the end and all the participants through decision makers really gaining a deeper understanding of the issues and the pros and cons of differently situated entities might experience from policy outcomes. I want to move to the Boster budget. We've started our 2022 calendar year budget process. We held a joint meeting with the Boster and the state-regulated market participants. Those are the regulated utilities that participate in the EIM, to review our draft 2022 calendar year budget. It was a public meeting, and other stakeholders participated as well. We heard really valuable input from the SRMPs, and now we're in a comment period. The Boster will vote on the final budget and announce the results at our fall meeting in San Diego. And I want to really emphasize this is an open process. All of the documents are posted on the Boster's webpage, which is housed over on the WEEB website. But also, my door is open if there are questions, concerns. We would love comments from any stakeholder engaged in the process as we go forward. We're, of course, very conscious that these are ratepayer dollars, and we need to spend them wisely to deepen our expertise and our effective engagement in the market. Speaking of doing that, striving to do that effectively despite COVID, on August 11th, WEEB, the Western Interstate Energy Board, and the Boster co-hosted a hands-on but virtual wholesale electricity market simulation training for state and provincial commissioners, policymakers, and because it was virtual, a lot of our staff, which was really exciting. They don't often get to engage in this sort of training if travel is required. The training was led by 2 professors from Stanford University's program on energy and sustainable development, and it was just a really big success. There was a lot of really good engagement. The game-based simulation tool allows participants in the training workshop to work in teams and perform the roles of an electricity generating company and a load-serving entity. And the market simulations provided really, I think, important insights into efficient market performance, the exercise of unilateral market power, the impact of forward contracts on bidding and price volatility, really fundamental stuff. And as regulators and staff, we don't always have experience with the incentives that traders and generation owners face. So we very quickly learned how incentives to maximize our individual profits and dispatch can really wreak havoc with system reliability and costs when the important elements such as market power mitigation aren't in place. We successfully blacked out our simulated market on our first try, which was a really good object lesson for us. And the reason we, I think, got a lot out of it is we really began to understand the interplay. We hope to make this a regular training opportunity for regulators and policymakers in the West and their staff. It fits, I think, very squarely in the BOSSER's education mandate and offers real value to the region in equipping regulators and their staff to understand market fundamentals at a deep enough level to engage in then the nuances of proposals really productively. Speaking of proposals, we will continue to follow the EIM Resource Efficiency Evaluation Initiative. We recognize this is moving at a really quick pace, headed for approval by the two governing bodies in December. Ensuring that evaluation is accurate and providing the right incentives is, as Elliot said, absolutely fundamental to the EIM's goals. We'll include a panel on the RSE in our fall meeting agenda, and we'll be reviewing and monitoring the analysis that CAISO's been performing and any lessons learned from this summer's market performance. So I just want to highlight our upcoming meetings. We won't have our usual meeting this Friday. Typically, we would have a meeting this Friday, but we had our budget meeting last week, and the Northwest Power Pool RA initiative is having a meeting with LEAD where many of the same commissioners are engaging around governance in that project, and that will land this Friday as well. So there won't be, if you are somebody who looks for our regularly scheduled monthly meeting, won't be happening this month. But we are planning to meet in person in the fall, in October, at the Westin and the San Diego Gas Lamp Quarter in San Diego, California on October 18th, 9 to 11:30 in the morning, just ahead of the CREPC YRAB meetings, like we usually do. And I hope some of you will be able to join us. The agenda will be posted shortly, and we would love to have folks participate. At this point, we won't be offering remote participation, although watching will be available, although we will continue to monitor the situation as COVID unfolds. I will certainly be there in a mask for what it's worth. And we'll continue to keep our meetings updated on the BOSSER page. And so with that, that's all I have. I'd love to answer any questions or hear any feedback.
So any questions from the governing body for Letha? Or Commissioner Tani, excuse me. I do want to apologize. I did say Board of State Regulators, and it should have been Body of State Regulators. And it's right in front of me. I should be able to read it. So.
It took me 6 months to start saying it right. So.
Okay. Letha, that was it. Commissioner Tani, that was an outstanding report, and I'm really excited about the training that you guys are doing. That's really outstanding. And I would hope if some of us would like to avail ourselves that maybe we could sit in on occasion as well.
I think that would be delightful. We've done that before where we've had governing body members participate in our training, and I'm sure we could fold you in. We're looking at our 2022 schedule. We're hoping maybe we'll be able to do a 101, another 101, and then maybe a 201, maybe something about day-ahead bids or LMPs. There's a lot to unpack.
Again, any questions from the governing body?
Yeah, Chair Decker, I do have a quick question for Commissioner Tani, please.
But go ahead, Jennifer.
All right. First of all, Commissioner Tani, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I really appreciated your kind words there. My question is really focused on the recent budget discussions that the BOSSR has been having with the state-regulated market participants and with other stakeholders, it sounds like. Since that's been an open process, I'm sure you're comfortable answering this question. I'd just like to hear a little bit more about what some of the concerns, if any, have been with the proposed budget and what changes the BOSSR might be considering making to its budget going forward based on that feedback.
Well, we haven't heard concerns per se yet. There was, I think Friday was very much a download opportunity. There were some questions raised about when might El Paso be incorporated in, and Texas, the Texas Commission might be incorporated in the allocation of costs. We have reached out to the Texas Commission. They have a little bit on their plates right now, and so they were, I think, a little lower on their priority list than perhaps we would like to be. So I look forward to the comments that we'll be getting and see if there's any areas of discomfort. I think thinking about shifts and changes that we might make in response to feedback, I think the training that we did with Stanford was really successful, but it also happened just a few weeks ago, and so we may look to add a little bit more of that. We weren't sure that the virtual format was really going to be effective, but having seen that it was, I think we may look to see if we can add some more of that into the budget. But on a whole, we're spending less than we had anticipated, and so I think we anticipate a pretty flat year-to-year allocation to the actual utilities.
Great, thank you. I attended one of those market simulation trainings years ago, and also was involved in a blackout of the system, so I can relate to your frustration there. It's a very good training. Thank you.
Any other questions for Commissioner Tani? Commissioner, thank you so much for your time today, and great report out, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, we'll turn the next report to the Regional Issues Forum, and I believe that the Regional Issues Forum Chair, Pam Sporberg, is on tap to give us that report. Pam, are you available?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So I have a brief update on the Regional Issues Forum. So the Regional Issues Forum just last week fully approved the changes to the RIF operating guidelines that align the Regional Issues Forum operating guidelines with the modifications to the EIM governance charter that were adopted by the governing body as part of the GRC Phase 1 recommendations and changes. The operating guidelines and the charter into alignment once again. And the changes that we adopted focused on a couple key areas. They were to expand the topics that the RIF may address by removing the limitation on engagement on issues that are in active stakeholder processes. The changes also maintain RIF independence in developing our own rules and procedures. They also revised the current sectors, and we added one liaison for the Federal Power Marketing and Administrations, and we are now an official standing item for EIM governing body meetings. I believe that it's always been something that has taken place in practice, but now it's an official component of your meetings, and we're looking forward to that slight change. I do want to note that the liaison for the Federal Power Marketing Administration is an additional liaison. This recognizes that Federal Power Marketing Administrations are members of other sectors, but that they are granted an additional liaison beyond that sector representation. I think it's an important distinction that, especially going forward and recognizing that there is sector membership, but additional representation for the RIF. We will be with these new changes to the liaisons and some transition off of the RIF from some current liaisons, We do have a number of open vacancies where we're seeking new sector liaisons. For the Western EIM entities and the ISO participating transmission owners, the separation of our sectors is creating a liaison vacancy of 1 for each of those sectors. For the consumer-owned utilities located within a Western EIM balancing authority area, where they're also seeking 1 additional liaison. There will be 2 open liaisons for the independent power producers and marketers sector, and then 1 open liaison for the Federal Power Marketing Administration. We are currently taking nominees in those sectors, and we are looking forward to the sector selection calls, which are being scheduled for the week of September 20th. Once those calls have taken place and the sectors have voted on new liaisons, those new liaisons will immediately be the new members of the Regional Issues Forum community. And so I'm looking forward to being able to introduce quite a number of new people at our next meeting. Our next meeting will take place in December. We will go through our regular scheduled programming where we will address a number of different topics that pertain to the EIM, and we are still deciding whether that meeting may or may not be in person. So stay tuned for further updates on our December meeting and new set of liaisons. I would ask, with so many openings, that if any of the governing body members have people in your network or that you can encourage to apply to be on the Regional Issues Forum, we really do hope to get a number of new and excited people to participate. The RIF is only as good as the liaisons and the ideas that the liaisons bring to the RIF. And so I hope that we can get a number of new people with new ideas to carry us into the future. And that will conclude my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Pam from the governing body? I'll let people think about that a minute, but in the meantime, so Pam, I want to say that you've done just an amazing and tremendous job of leadership with the RIF, and particularly walking through these changes that are being proposed for your charter. And to me, it's really an exciting time for the RIF because I think that this really does mark a watershed moment where the RIF has much more impact and say with the governing body. And I think I'm hoping that as people are looking at whether they are going to raise their hand to participate as a RIF liaison, that they're recognizing that this really is a unique opportunity to have a voice in a different way than has ever been the case previously. Well, so I know while you guys you're individually still participate in stakeholder initiatives and on stakeholder calls, I think your input into the governing body is also going to be very impactful as we get to some of the joint authority issues. So I want to applaud you for the work that you've done, the leadership that you've shown, and I've talked to a few people about being a liaison, and I'm hoping they're going to probably step forward and take that up.
Well, thank you, Chair Decker. I very much appreciate the kind words and the compliment. It really has been a community effort to get this work together and input. And I do especially want to recognize the ISO staff. I know the ISO is short-staffed around both governing body support and Regional Issues Forum support, and to really have stepped up and supported the efforts to get these changes implemented has been, very helpful to me and to the liaisons. So I thank you for the compliments, but I can't take full credit for all of the work. And all the liaisons have really been very active in their perspectives and their contributions, and ISO staff has just been great to support all of the many different pieces that are going into place to not only update the guidelines, but to get basically a sector call for each sector scheduled and organized for next week.
Very good. Very good. Okay. All right.
If I could, I just have this is sort of just a practical question, but hi, Pam. How much time does it really take to be a RIF liaison?
That's a really excellent question, Val. I think it really depends on the extent to which someone is already engaged in EIM issues. So if you already are engaged in EIM issues and have regular contact with your sector, I think the incremental time to be a RIF liaison is really 3 to 4 hours a month on a regular basis, and then plus the time it takes to attend our meetings. So when those are in person, that's really a full day commitment, while when we're virtual, it's a 3 or 4 hour commitment. So for someone who's already actively working in the EIM, I would say about 3 or 4 hours a month. It does take significantly more time to have a leadership role on the RIF. I would say to be a secretary or vice chair, it's probably 8 to 10 hours a month. And then for the chair, 8 to 10 hours a month, except when you're trying to update the operating guidelines and completely transform the organization. And it's been significantly more during the last few months. So I hope that it's an incremental, I think, commitment for a lot of folks, but a lot of opportunity to really add value to the region.
And it does indeed. Thank you very much.
Okay, Pam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, we're going to move to the next agenda item, and I'm going to turn it over to Roger Collison and Dan Schonkweiler. I'm probably butchered that last name. Sorry, Dan, to walk us through the EIM Governance Review Committee Phase 2 governance document changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Decker. And as you know, this is the next step in the process. We had the approval by the joint approval by the board and the governing body on August 20th of the GRC Phase 2 proposal, and this is now the implementing steps to put that into motion. And let me just, before I turn it to Dan Schonkweiler, which you said quite well, for his presentation, let me thank Dan and Burton Gross as well from my legal team, and I'm sure there's plenty of others that touched this and did a fabulous job. But I had particular insight into their efforts and work and the hours that they've spent both in assisting the GRC and then in all the implementation and all the aspects of it. So I do want to call them out for that and thank them for their extraordinary effort and work product in that process. So with that, Dan, let me turn it over to you for the presentation on this.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Chair Decker. Good afternoon. I apologize that I can't be seen on camera, but I do want to make sure I can be heard before I go on.
We can hear you.
You are heard. Fantastic. All right. So to add to Roger's context here, this is the implementation of Phase 2 or Part 2, and this is on top of changes that have already been implemented for the GRC's work on Part 1. You all voted to implement or to support or to implement those changes back on June 30th. They had to do with market expertise, selection of governing body members, a new role and new liaisons for the RIF, and the next reevaluation of EIM governance. The board then did their part on July 16th, and those changes are already implemented and reflected in the documents we're looking at. So next slide, Christina. So now we're looking at the Part 2 proposal, in which the GRC deferred the most challenging issue, which had to do with, or a set of issues, which had to do with the scope of the delegation of authority and some related process issues. The GRC submitted its final paper, and the EIM governing body, together with the board, approved that policy in the August 20th meeting. So when Bert and I and Roger and others turned to implementation, we focused on the summary of those recommendations that's on pages 19 to 22 of the Part 2 draft final proposal. And it identifies, so we're tracking and trying to make sure we implement those. That has to do with joint authority and the new scope of joint authority and the model for meetings. the slight revision to the advisory role of the governing body, a process for resolving possible deadlocks over policy initiatives, a tweak to the existing process to resolve any disputes over how to classify any particular initiative for purposes of the role of the governing body and the board in deciding it. The GRC eliminated short-term emergency filings and finally added some voting and notice rules related to any changes in all of this in the delegation of authority. Next slide, please. To implement these changes required modifications to 3 different governance documents, the corporate bylaws, the charter for Eim governance, and the guidance document, which has a much longer title. The changes that are being proposed to those documents all require board approval for modification, but before going to the board in a few weeks, management is seeking the advisory input of the governing body on the specific changes and the specific red lines. Next slide. In the corporate bylaws, the following changes are reflected. First, in Article 4, which is the article that establishes EIM governance and the EIM governing body, there are a range of revisions to reflect the new joint authority model, and that's going to be the base rule for how tariff amendments within joint authority are decided or approved. Then towards back in Article 9, which governs the amendment to the bylaws, the baseline rule about durability, about voting requirements to amend the delegation of authority, and notice requirements for any changes. Those rules are written into new subsections in Article 9. I want to call your attention because it can be a little, it's not obvious on the surface of things how it works, but there's a related to the durability. There's also a change in Article 4 that's about amending the charter, and it essentially says the charter for Eim government, the board has to follow the rules in the charter in order to amend that charter. And the reason for that is that the delegation of authority isn't entirely in the bylaws. A part of that delegation of authority, a big part, is in the charter for Eim governance. So let's go to the next slide and close out this topic. So the other part of ensuring the durability is a new section in Section 9 that has to do with how the charter for Eim governance is amended, and it says that any changes to Section 2.2 of the charter, which is where the rest of the delegation of authority is, have to follow the process in Article 9 of the bylaws and all the conditions in order and that assures that the durability requirements in Article 9 apply to any changes to the delegation of authority. Now, in the remainder of these bullets, in Section 2.2, that's what establishes the new scope of joint authority, the modified definition of the advisory role, a new process for resolving any possible deadlocks about a particular policy initiative, the adjustment to the existing process about how to resolve disputes about decisional classification of an initiative, and then finally there was a former section there about short-term emergency filings. 5 years ago, it seemed like an emergency filing might require getting approval by only one meeting but in the meantime, everyone's become comfortable with joint meetings, so that rule didn't seem necessary anymore. Sorry, virtual meetings. Next slide, please. Finally, the guidance document reflects the following changes. First, we've tried to shorten the title, which is a little unwieldy, to a new, shorter title that's still descriptive of what's in it. The language related to the delegation of authority and resolving disputes or deadlocks about policy initiatives and decisional classifications, all that language is drawn from the GRC proposal. And finally, there are some small clarifications. They are updates and then consolidated and expanded section about severability principles that we've been applying to explain how those work. That's everything I have, unless there are questions about some of the proposed changes or anything else related.
Okay, questions from the governing body in regard to the proposed changes?
So this is Val. I will say that at least my reading of these documents shows that there was a faithful translation of the Governance Review Committee's recommendation into the language covered by the three documents. I did want to note that, and I don't know if this is the right place to do it. So again, I want to acknowledge that the red lines that have been developed comport with, at least from my own read, the GRC's recommendation. Separately, and I don't think the GRC ever really discussed this, although it was sort of implicit in a belief that as we go down the road, the EDAM road, and this what you see reflected in front of you is all EIM related, but as we go down the EDAM road, there would likely be the need for another governance review committee to deal with EDAM governance. And that governance review committee would be an advisory committee. And so I think in the section in the corporate bylaws that deals with advisory committees, while again, this was not an issue that was expressly discussed at the GRC, it strikes me that there should be some additional language change, and I understand it would be subject to certain notice requirements and possibly stakeholder review with regard to the advisory committee committees that might be formed subject to joint authority issues. So I just want to point out from my own perspective that is certainly something I would recommend my colleagues consider in providing advice to the Board of Governors.
Thank you, Val. Other comments or questions from the governing body members? Hearing none, do we have any comments or questions from the... Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to iterate my thoughts that as I went through all of the proposed additions and deletions, I found them to be totally consistent with the GRC recommendations and have no comments as to additional changes as proposed. As to Val's recommendation, I think that is noteworthy, and I think that we should find some way of following up on that. And if the initial thought is to initially advise the Board of Governors as a first step, I could support that, and then find a way to move that through a way of giving that influence.
Thank you, Rob. Any other comments from the governing body members? Any comments from any of the public comment on the EIM Governance Review Committee Phase 2 governance documents?
As a reminder, if you'd like to make a comment and you're using the WebEx audio, you may enter the comment queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. You'll hear notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment. I do not see any callers in the queue as of now.
Thank you. So I'm going to I agree with you, Rob. Val, I agree with you that there is a bit of a miss on the advisory committees, particularly where there are issues of joint authority. And Rob, I agree with you that also, and Val, that this is very consistent with the GRC documentation. But I think there was a bit of a miss on the intent for advisory committees appointments. So I know we want to keep this moving, and it's been noticed. The Board of Governors is slated to take a look at this. So Roger, could you walk us through maybe a way we can keep this moving and yet still, in our advisory capacity, ensure that the governing or the Board of Governors recognizes that we think this is something that should be taken up?
Sure, happy to do that. When we have on the agenda today, and we have teed up with the Board of Governors the implementation of the GRC proposal as it is written, and as the documents were amended. So I think moving forward with that and getting the governing body's advisory opinion on that, for lack of a better term, more discrete issue, would be advisable to do that in a separate motion as we have teed up. As to Valerie's recommendation, I think it would be prudent that, to the extent that the governing body wants to go forward with that recommendation, is that we could have a motion with such a recommendation that it goes to, that the governing body in essence recommends, or at least will vote on whether it recommends to move forward with suggesting the board take up such an additional change to the bylaws. And because the bylaws are a foundational governance document, there's a requirement in those bylaws that the board has 30 days notice of a vote to change them. So what we would do is we would take that back to the governing body if that was an approved motion to recommend that change. We take that back to the board. I don't need to make this more confusing. I apologize. We take that to the board. We would have a short stakeholder proceeding so that all stakeholders have due process and notice of the proposed change, and ultimately with the goal of having a motion and additional change to the bylaws at the board's next notice meeting after the September meeting. There's a September 22nd and 23rd meeting. And then the next one after that, I believe, is November. Stacey Bernard could confirm that for us, but I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, but that is in November. And that would give us an opportunity to give due process to this recommended change, i.e. the notice, both to the board and to stakeholders, and an opportunity for vetting the proposed change.
So kind of to summarize, it would be to go ahead and move forward with the changes we have here and then do a second motion for a recommendation or advisory recommendation for changes to the committee appointments.
Correct.
Sure. Okay. And discussion, comments from the governing body?
Jennifer, I just wanted to provide maybe some clarifying comments for those stakeholders who maybe weren't as involved in the GRC stakeholder process. So just to make sure I'm on the same page as my fellow governing body members, when we talk about the second motion regarding the clarification to the Board of Governors bylaws, I believe what we're talking about, and I want to make sure that Val and of course Chair Decker can confirm this, is we're talking about instances where governance changes will be needed in the future. I believe Val mentioned the instance of the EDAM or extended day ahead market stakeholder process kicking back off, and we're moving closer to a future scenario in which EDAM or some other market initiative such as that might be implemented. That would certainly be a trigger for making additional governance changes. And of course, the GRC has considered that additional governance changes will be necessary in the future. And so in that instance where changes might be necessary, and those changes, of course, are under the joint authority construct, you're talking about a scenario in which both the Board of Governors and the EIM governing body would have the ability to jointly appoint essentially a board-level advisory committee to take on that work, much as the Governance Review Committee took on that work over the past couple of years. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what we're discussing for that potential second motion.
May I just jump in, governing body, and not to necessarily answer your question, Jennifer, to add what I think, which I think is on point with what you're saying, is as we've been talking here, I've been quickly sketching out and thinking through what a motion would look like. And I think the motion would, in essence, recommend that the board change the bylaws, that recommendation would be to change Section 2 to the bylaws, Article 5, Section 2, that on the advisory committee, and in particular, that the governance and then any advisory committee to address governance of the EIM, market, including the joint authority established under the bylaws, would be jointly established by the board and the governing body. I can make that a little bit more elegant in a second here. I just need 30 seconds more. But so the theory would be that, as you said, that it would be advisory committee, much like the GRC, designed to address a governance or joint authority issue of the EIM governing body, and that would be kind of the change that would be suggested. Anyway, with that, I didn't mean to preempt you, but I just wanted to provide that context.
Thank you for that clarification, Roger.
Anita, this is John.
Yes, go ahead, John.
I think I had the same general question that Jennifer had, and Roger, you answered it, but it would be a bylaw change, and it takes the 30-day notice. So really what we'd do is we would be advising in this point, in this meeting, with advice to the Board of Governors for specific changes to the bylaws to be drafted at some future date. But it really pertains to setting up advisory committees as needed given the new joint authority world that we're in. So yeah, I think Roger answered my question. So and I think it's a good change. I definitely support it.
Any other comments or questions by the governing body?
Just sorry, not belaboring the point, but I just wanted to thank Kaiso and my colleagues. I think it's timely that we address this right now, and particularly that it be put in place hopefully by November. I'm going to look at Elliot at this one, but I don't think we're going to have a governance, a joint authority advisory committee formed. Joint Authority Issue Advisory Committee formed before November in any event. So I think we're timely.
I think that's right. So thank you. This certainly works procedurally, and I'm glad to hear the engagement on this important topic. So thanks.
Okay. Back to you, Roger.
Okay. Well, if we are. Let's see, I think we checked for public comment, and we've been through comments and questions. I think what we should do at this point, Chair Decker, is go forward with the motion on the advisory opinion. And what we haven't determined is whether or not the governing body would want to have a written or verbal. I can take a guess on that, but it might be best if there's a little bit of discussion on whether we're going to move forward and support the documents from the board, whether that would be written or verbal. And then I can provide the motion on the advisory opinion. And then once we do that motion, I'll go ahead with a second motion on the recommendation, as I just mentioned.
I'm happy to weigh in that I will be voting in support of these recommended changes, and I think what works nicely is the verbal advisory input to the Board of Governors.
Okay. Why don't I just give an opportunity if anyone else wants to comment, and if not, I'll go ahead and bring forth the motion.
And Anita, I'll agree that I will be prepared to support the motion, and I concur with Val that verbal input from you as a chair to the Board of Governors is very sufficient.
Great. Okay, well, let me go ahead and read the motion, and I think we're on track here. So move that the EIM governing body will provide verbal advisory input to the Board of Governors supporting the proposed amendments to the amended and restated bylaws, the Charter for Energy Imbalance Market Governance, and guidance for handling policy initiatives within the decisional authority or advisory role of the EIM governing body, as discussed in and attached to the memorandum dated September 1, 2021. Can I have a moving party, please?
So moved. This is Val.
Val, thank you. And second?
This is John. I'll second it.
Thank you, John. Chair Decker, your vote, please.
Aye.
Member Fong, your vote.
Aye.
Member Gardner.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bill. We had some rustling there. Sorry.
Was that to me?
That's
Aye.
yes, sir. And Member Prescott.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, governing body. The motion passes. And so we now, at the request of the governing body, we have another motion. And bear with me, and we'll see how elegant this comes out. The EIM governing body moves that it recommends that the ISO Board of, let me start that over, moves that the EIM governing body recommends that the ISO Board of Governors further change the bylaws by adding the following sentence at the end of Article 5, Section 2 to the bylaws. Any advisory committee to address the governance of the energy imbalance market, including the joint authority established under Article 4, shall be jointly established by the board and the EIM governing body by approval of 2/3 of the members of each body then in office. So this is a motion to recommend that the board take that up, which the minutes will reflect would include a stakeholder process and timing to the board, the ultimate goal of timing for an approval of the actual change in November, the November 3rd and 4th meeting, I've been told. So with that and that clarification, do I have a moving party, please?
Before we take any action, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
This motion limits the topic of the advisory committee to that which addresses the governance of the EIM. And is that's an intentional limitation because that's all we've really discussed right now in terms of joint authority. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a governance of the energy imbalance market and including the joint authority. And so those are the current scope of authority that we have. I think that is broad enough that governance includes expanding that governance to include EDAM, if that's what your concern is.
A little bit, but my concern.
Yeah, then I think that's fair. And so, I mean, we could also make the motion, honestly, we could make it to consider changing the advisory committee structure under Article 5, Section 2. But this is meant to start the conversation. It's not meant to be perfect. That's why we want to have a stakeholder process so that when we actually get to the point of bringing it to the board, that we have, if we need to have better language or if there's a concern that this does not encompass everything we need to do, then we could change it. This is kind of part and parcel of why I think it's prudent that this be done through this process. We're making changes to foundational governance documents, and I will not profess to say the perfect change that I would at this point say we should just add into the bylaws. So what I'm trying to do is capture the sentiment. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. I would have used a little bit different moving language, but which anyway,
well,
I don't want to belabor the point. That makes sense, yes.
So Val, this is Anita. Again, we're here and have this bite at the apple this afternoon. So if there's some wordsmithing that makes it more clear that Roger gets some guidance from us on, I think it's worth taking the moment to make the change, to propose what you would really do want to say. Oh, you're on mute, Val.
I didn't do it.
So, no, I did. So, I was wondering why it can't simply say any advisory committee to address any joint authority item or any joint authority issue, including joint authority established under Article 4. Why do we have to specifically say governance of the energy imbalance market? Why can't it be broader up front?
Well, I think my initial concern would be a joint authority issue feels a little bit vague to me, and I think actually governance is not necessarily a joint authority issue, and we are, in my mind, we are broadening it by addressing the governance of the EIM, and adding to joint authority is related to specific decisional items that are deemed to be under the joint authority of the EIM governing body under the documents we've just put together, and it covers those policy initiatives. And governance broadens that to the full spectrum of what you are doing, in my mind.
So, Roger, let me ask this. So maybe this is a meet in the middle place. Could it say we move that any issue agreed upon by the Board of Governors and the governing body and to include what you proposed in terms of the governance documents? I think that gives us a lot of latitude that yes, it certainly is these things, but it also leaves that door open for consideration of joint appointments to advisory committees that may be outside of that scope. So if we said any issue agreed to upon by the Board of Governors and the governing body and to include. Val, does that help?
That resolves my concerns. Maybe we should ask our governing body attorney. What does she think?
We're not a client, but look, I don't want to wordsmith this here, but I do want to get it right, and I'll make one more comment on this, and I'm happy to make this work. My only concern, and again, with the notion that I believe this language could get fixed as we stakeholder it. My only concern would be that any issue agreed upon by the Board of Governors and the governing body adds an element of how they agree upon that issue. And maybe what would work is saying any issues related to the governance or joint authority of the energy imbalance market, so it's related to, which broadens it.
Hey, Roger, I know we're getting. No. Are we going to get an opportunity? I'm sorry. Are we going to get an opportunity? Is it technologically feasible to get this up on a screen, or is that just going to be too much to ask for? I'm wondering. Maybe Stacy has a mention.
No, I think it's technologically feasible. What I would suggest we do, if we want to do that, is one of two things. Let me just fix what I had put here into a Word document. We could either take a 5-minute break or we could move on to the next item while I do that.
I would suggest, I like the idea, Chair Decker, if I might recommend, I do think for folks on the phone who probably are maybe not able to see this, or maybe just for just visibility and final clarity, I think we're getting very close. But if Roger just took a couple minutes to tap it into an email and got it to Stacy and got it up on the screen, would that be acceptable? We just have it in front of us finally and make sure we know exactly what we're motioning.
So Elliot, we've done the major thing, which was to give our advisory approval to the base documents. Yeah. I would like to move on with the agenda and then come back to this, because I think we're close enough that I don't think we'll forget what our conversation was between now and the end of the sub-entity scheduling to keep us moving.
So would you like Roger in the interim, which should take some time?
I'd like Roger. Yeah.
Later. Okay. So he'll have something. We can come back to it and be ready to keep going. Sounds good. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Roger.
That. No, my pleasure, and I will just, we'll have that momentarily. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a decisional item for the EIM governing body, and it is the sub-entity scheduling coordinator. I'm going to turn it over to Anna and Greg Cook.
Afternoon, Chair Decker, Vice Chair Gonzioka, and members of the governing body. We're happy to be here today to present to you for a decision the Western EIM sub-entity scheduling coordinator role, addition to our governing, given the last discussion. The EIM, the market rules for the EIM. Happy here to have today Greg Cook, our Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure Policy. I also wanted to thank Daniel Johnson, who was our lead policy developer for this item. And with that, I will turn it over to Greg Cook to present the item.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, Chair Decker and members of the EIM Governing Board. So we started this initiative a while back in response to the ISO's implementation agreement with Public Service Company of Colorado. And in that implementation agreement included a new category of market participant that would directly settle and interact with the ISO. This was done in order to preserve PSCO's Balancing Authority Area's current joint dispatch agreement. So in response to that, we committed to make similar functionality available across the Western EIM. Although we've seen a delay in PSCO's joining the EIM, we're still moving forward at this time so we can provide this functionality across the EIM. This proposal falls under, not quite to the joint authority model, so this proposal falls under the EIM governing body's primary approval authority. The reason for this is the new proposed participation category would only be available to entities operating balancing authority areas outside of the ISO. Next slide, please. So we're proposing a new EIM sub-entity participation category really to allow utilities located within an EIM balancing authority area to financially settle load and their non-participating resources, imbalance energy, directly with the ISO instead of with the EIM entity. Currently, under the current rules, only EIM entities are allowed to directly settle and interact with the ISO, and then that load is settled. The load for what would be the EIM sub-entities is settled under the EIM entities' open access transmission tariffs. Let me provide some additional details on this. So this new category would not only provide the EIM entity area to settle load and their non-participating resource and balance energy with the ISO, but we have some additional details around this. First, to become an EIM entity, parties would have to enter into an EIM sub-entity agreement with the ISO. They would also have to make a payment of the implementation to cover the implementation costs, and then they would have the opportunity to provide their base set schedule submissions and receive direct imbalance energy settlement from the ISO. They would also have the opportunity to provide their own forecast outage and network model information directly to the ISO. And the biggest impact of this would be, as a result of all this, the sub-entities' imbalance energy would be settled at the ISO's real-time market price as opposed to prices that are currently specified under the EIM Balancing Authority Area's open access transmission tariffs. Next slide. We did have one concern that there could be an excessive numbers of sub-entities, and the concern was this would impose a large administrative burden on the ISO without the corresponding benefits. So the proposal includes several eligibility criteria for EIM sub-entities that are designed to limit its use to larger utilities that both operate a distribution or transmission service to serve load. That sub-entity role would be limited to entities that are meeting several criteria. First, they would have to be an electric utility embedded within an EIM entity balancing authority area and not be receiving long-term wholesale full requirement services. And they would need to own a distribution or transmission facilities that were directly connected to the transmission system of the EIM entities, but not only own the facilities, but also use them for the purpose of providing electric service to retail and wholesale customers or serving eligible customers as a local publicly owned electric utility. And then finally, they must own or control one or more supply resources for the purpose of serving their customers. Next slide, please. So in addition to those eligibility criteria, the establishment of an EIM subentity is also subject to the ultimate approval of the EIM entity itself. This proposal provides the EIM entities with the authority to decide eligibility, which is important to ensure that consistency with operational and business practices. So in this instance, the EIM entities would have several options for providing eligibility to new EIM subentities. One, they could deny that eligibility. Two, they could provide that eligibility to the entities that meet the ISO's criteria that we just went over to become an EIM subentity. Or the approval may be based on existing and accepted contractual or tariff-based practices for imbalance energy accounting within the balancing authority area that would distinguish that among its transmission service customers in a way that includes subentity-like characteristics. And I think one example with this would be for grandfathered transmission service agreements that would differ from the host service that's provided. Okay, next slide, please. And because the role of the EIM subentity can affect balancing authority areas operations, which remains the responsibility of the EIM entity, the proposal provides EIM entities retain a role in several aspects of the subentity's direct participation with the ISO. First, they would have the authority to modify the EIM subentity's base schedules and also approve their forecasting methods. Again, this is to ensure they accurately reflect the balancing authority area's operational plans and forecasts. They would also have the authority to approve whether the subentities could perform various functions related to the balancing authority area operations. Those would include manual dispatch of resources issued to the EIM entity's resources, also to submit their own resource and transmission outages directly to the ISO, and submit their own network models, meaning that they could develop their own network models for the EIM subentity system that would be ultimately used by the ISO. Next slide, please. So stakeholders largely support the subentity proposal. There was some initial concerns, again, about that widespread proliferation of EIM subentities could adversely impact operational and business practices. This was addressed through the stakeholder process, through the proposed eligibility criteria. However, there are some entities that would not meet those eligibility criteria that would also like to be able to directly settle with the ISO. And then next, some entities also would believe that the EIM should model energy transfers between entities within the same balancing authority area. This is something that we did look into, but found that it was problematic because it was inconsistent with the EIM's existing interchange modeling. So what we decided was this would be very difficult for the ISO to do, and ultimately determined that this was outside of the scope of this initiative. And then finally, one that's not on here, we did receive some late concerns about subentities having sufficient information to provide their share of resources in order to pass the resource sufficiency evaluations. And to address this, we've included functionality in our business requirement specifications that would allow subentities to see the EIM level resource sufficiency evaluation requirement data to help them with that. Next slide, please. So with that, we request that EIM governing body approve the new EIM subentity scheduling coordinator participation category. This proposal allows the entities to directly settle their imbalance energy with the ISO. It also includes rules to ensure that role is consistent with each balancing authority area's operational business practices. And finally, it fulfills our commitment to provide this functionality across the EIM. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, questions from governing body members?
This is John, just a comment. So,
Go ahead, John.
just wanted to thank staff for putting this together. It looks like a real good compromise. One of the stated objectives that we have in the governing body is to enhance the market, and this certainly does. I think it gives more options to the sub-entities working into the market. But also, I think you've done a good job, as I look through this, of protecting the EIM entities themselves and their differing operating practices, because they don't all operate the same way. So I think by giving them kind of final decision authority on this resolves that particular issue. So again, I just wanted to thank staff for putting this together and all the entities that worked on it.
Yeah, thank you. Greg, like John, I see this as a very positive and responsive initiative to the needs of the West. I think that it really provides a lot of value. And I believe I have one question, and I believe you may have answered it with one of your last comments, but I do want to ask a clarification. And this has to do with the resource efficiency evaluation being done at the BA level, but the penalties being done at the sub-entity level. And I was trying to mentally work through on how that works. And it seems to me it would only work if the sub-entity had all the information that the BA had, so it could see everything move through in the pre-real time and then real time process to be able to know where they are, so they could then ultimately be making adjustments. And you made a comment that the business practice was going to be updated to ensure that the sub-entity would have access to the information to do that same evaluation. So is that correct, or what is being done to rectify that difference?
Yeah, that's correct. So we would be, as I mentioned, we would be providing information so that the sub-entities could have access to the EIM BAA level requirements for the resource sufficiency evaluation. But then you're also right that those resource sufficiency evaluations, both capacity and the flex ramp tests, would continue to be conducted at the balancing authority area level. However, we would, any penalties that were resulting of that would be allocated at the EIM sub-entity level if the test was failed at the BAA level. So that also, provides the EIM sub-entity, some protections that, if they're, by knowing what the BAA level requirement is and knowing how their EIM entity allocates that down to the sub-entities, they should have sufficient information to ensure that they're protecting themselves from, potentially incurring any resource sufficiency evaluation penalties, and ensuring that they're providing sufficient resources.
So as an additional question, then the sub-entity would have access to the EIM BAA level, so they can see that the BA is passing or not passing or what's happening, and then they coordinate with the BA to ensure that it's not them that's causing any issues or that they are meeting their portion of the obligation.
Yeah, I think the way to look at it is they would have the information, so they would know what the BAA level requirements are. They don't know exactly how much the BAA would necessarily be providing to meet those requirements, but they would know under the BAA's rules how much their responsibility of that requirement would be. So in the event that there was a test failure, that those penalties would be allocated. The ISO would directly allocate those penalties to the EIM sub-entity. So the sub-entity, if they were, aware, had all that information, could ensure that they didn't incur any of those penalties.
Okay. So with the modifications, the sub-entity will know if they are a driver of an issue that doesn't allow the BA then to meet the capacity evaluation. Or and if they aren't, they'll know what portion of it is theirs.
Right. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from governing body members? question, and that was on, I think it was slide 23, I think. No, 24. No, must have been 22. Anyway, the bullet point, it was stakeholder comments. It was entities that do not meet the criteria but want to settle with the ISO. So the second bullet on the first item. Can you give us an example of what kind of entity was wanting to be able to settle directly with the ISO that would not meet the criteria? And I'm asking that so we know who we might hear from.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a direct answer. I'll have to get back to you on that one. I mean, I think it was largely that, the problem was they weren't meeting the eligibility criteria, particularly of owning the distribution or transmission facilities. We're doing it more through contractual basis, but, I'd have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure exactly who you might be hearing from there.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful, so we just have an idea in our minds, like what's the scope of the folks that would want this that don't qualify. So that'd be helpful. Thank you. I'll look forward to that. Do we have any public comments?
I just phoned a friend and was able to get an answer for you. Like UAMPS is one of them that might have issues with this.
Okay. I was afraid of that answer. Okay. Any public comment in regard to this decision?
As a reminder, if you'd like to make a comment and you're using the WebEx audio, you may enter the comment queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and your comment. I do not see any callers in the queue as of now.
Okay. So last question, any comments or questions from the governing body? Roger, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay. So we have a motion. And let me just make sure I have the right one in front of me at the moment. Move that the EIM governing body approves the proposal to create the EIM sub-entity market participation category as described in the memorandum dated September 1, 2021. Move that the EIM governing body authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Can I have a moving party, please?
I'll second.
Okay. I'm sorry, who was that? Anita, was that you first?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And Chair Decker, your vote, please.
Aye.
Member Fong?
Aye.
Member Gardner?
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzilka?
Aye.
And Member Prescott?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, governing body. That motion has passed. And I think we are ready to put up on the screen the revised. Oh, you're muted, Anita. I'm sorry.
Before we do this, I want to go back and I want to thank staff for all the work on the sub-entity scheduling as well. this issue has been out there, and while it didn't solve everything for all parties, it is a step forward, and I think it's a very positive step forward. And I know it took, while there didn't seem to be a lot of controversy about it, it still is, I think, another good arrow in the quiver of working within the EIM and the expansion of the market. So thank you for the work on this.
Becker, this is Anna McKenna. I wanted to thank you for those comments, and I appreciate and I agree with you. This is a good improvement, a good step forward.
All right. So, Roger, go ahead.
Okay, we have a new motion, new and improved. Move that the EIM governing body recommends that the ISO Board of Governors further change the bylaws by adding the following sentence at the end of Article 5, Section 2 to the bylaws. Any advisory committee to address matters related to joint authority issues or the governance of the EIM, or the Energy Imbalance Market, currently or as it may evolve, including the joint authority established under Article 4, shall be jointly established by the board and the EIM governing body by approval of 2/3 of the members of each body then in office.
Aha, so moved. This is Val.
That was awful quick. And a second, please.
This is John. I'll second it.
Thank you, John. Chair Decker, your vote.
Aye.
Member Fong?
Aye.
Member Gardner?
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka?
Roger, before voting, I have a clarification question for you. Assuming voting for approval, then Anita will address this with the Board of Governors at their next meeting. Will this be coming back to us as a red line at a subsequent meeting after any stakeholder process, or I just want to understand what would happen as next steps?
I think we would. I mean, there's a couple of things that could happen on this, and I will candidly admit I haven't had the ability to fully think this through. But there's two options. One is it would come back as an advisory opinion. So if it went through stakeholder process and changed, a few words here and there or whatever it might be, it would come back to you in some fashion, either through an advisory opinion would be my guess, or it could be it could even be through a joint meeting with an advisory opinion with a joint meeting with the board, if we have a joint meeting set up by then.
Okay, yes, thank you. With that understanding, I vote aye.
Okay. And Anita, did you want to comment before I take the final vote?
Well, I think
your hand up.
Go ahead and get John, and I'll make my comment.
Okay. And Member Prescott, your vote, please.
I'll vote aye.
My comment was going to...
That was good.
So my comment was going to be that the November Board of Governors meeting is on November 3rd, or 3rd and 4th. And we will have at least an executive session in October, and October 20th. So there potentially is time to get this noticed, and for us to see any comments or whatever by October 20th in preparation for it then to go to the Board of Governors by November 3rd. Now that's my back of the envelope. I could have lots of dates wrong and lots of process wrong, but just thinking about where the dates are.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. That would be my expectation. We should have plenty of time to run this through the process and get it ultimately to the board for final approval of the changed bylaws by November 3rd.
So, Rob, did that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, you guys, thanks for bearing with that. Roger, thank you for your quick and articulate identification and writing up the issue. So well done.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. All right.
And
next on.
You got it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Next on the agenda, we have the briefing on the EIM benefits. You heard Elliot doing a rousing cheer on that earlier. So I believe we have Anna and Guillermo.
Thank you, Chair Decker. Yes, we do have Dr. Bautista Alderete here today to give us a little bit more details than I'm going to provide you. But I just wanted to take one quick moment. Yes, we had some good benefits results this past quarter, and so we're happy to be reporting on those. I did want to also note that Dr. Alderete will also be touching on the performance of the market in July and give you a little bit of a glimpse with regards to how some of the changes that we implemented this past summer have been impacting the market. And with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Bautista Alderete.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Decker and members of the EIM governing body. Thank you for having me. This briefing has three main components: the EIM benefits, the EIM performance, and also includes a summary of the summer readiness. Just yesterday, we have a dedicated call with market participants to go over the performance of the summer conditions for the month of July. Given the short time that we have, I will be brief with the first two parts of the briefing. Next slide, please. The gross economic benefits of EIM reached a record height of $132.7 million for the second quarter of 2021. A significant share of the benefits happened in the month of June, when the EIM experienced high load conditions, and that was across the footprint, and also resulting higher prices. Furthermore, the EIM benefits reported in the second quarter includes now the benefits for the new onboarded entities. That includes Bank, the second phase of Bank, the Turlock Irrigation District, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Public Service Company of New Mexico, and the Northwestern Energy. All together brings that level of benefits for the second quarter. Next slide, please. With these record high benefits of the second quarter, the cumulative benefits since EIM inception is now at $1.42 billion. The steady increase of the EIM benefits over time is in part due to the onboarding of new EIM entities, because it has two dimensions. The first one is that when a new entity joins the EIM, it will accrue benefits for itself, but it will also enable more transfers among other areas. So there is a compounding effect for each EIM entity added to the market. Next slide, please. Another benefit of the EIM is the avoided energy curtailment that continues to happen. We can see that there is a seasonal trend here. Typically, the curtailment of energy happens in the shoulder months of the springtime. They subside in the summertime and is steady over the years. And having the EIM market minimizes the level of curtailment that we can see in the market, as highlighted in the portion in blue. Next slide, please. A significant contribution of the EIM benefits is through the transfers, and that happens across balancing areas. Transfers are the enablers of lower cost supply. As such, the transfer volume is a good indicator of a portion of the benefits from the EIM market. It can also be possible that a transfer is realized between two areas that are not directly connected, and that happens by means of wheel-through in the market. In the second quarter, the volume of wheels-through for each area was smaller than the overall volume of imports and exports. We have been monitoring this trend, and this is part of the discussion of the extended day-ahead market enhancements. Next slide, please. The transfers, even though are very dynamic, you can see that they follow certain trends. And when we move from the springtime to the summer, you can see the transition. In the April-May timeframe, we can see that CAISO particularly is going to have a large volume of exports to other areas. Other areas are going to have the mirror transfers absorbing that additional energy. As we move into the summer, that pattern diminishes because now the trend happens to be more in the import side for the CAISO. Next slide, please. In terms of prices, monthly average prices track overall below $4 per megawatt hour for the majority of the EIM areas. And EIM prices track very closely to bilateral prices for the months of April and May. June, as you may see, saw a significant difference between the EIM prices and the bilateral prices. Each bar represents the price for an EIM area, and the markups reflect the bilateral prices. We use simple proxy bilateral prices to have a reference. We use the Mid-C for the Northwest and the Palo Verde and the Mid for the Southwest. Next slide, please. When we see the dynamic over time, an interesting factor is to see the trend on an hourly basis, how the prices trend over the day. And we have here the 3 months, and you can see that as we move from the springtime to the summertime, the trend goes from having low prices in the middle of the day, showing the pattern of the solar production that we have in the system. As we go into the summertime, like June, the prices start to steadily increase from the early morning all the way to the evening time frame when we reach the peak. That is the seasonal trend that we can observe for not just the CAISO, but also for the EIM as a whole. Next slide, please. The second part of this briefing is just to give you a very brief summary of how things have been working so far for the summer time frame. This is mainly focused on the CAISO area. In the last briefing, we presented an update for the month of June. This update covers mainly the month of July. Next slide, please. Oh, that's good. This summarizes all the market enhancements that we have implemented in the summer. We started as early in May, and the last component of the enhancement was effective on August 4th. We have different components. The main one that applies to the EIM entities is the number one listed here, and that is an enhancement that we implemented for the capacity test, in which, starting on June 15, we add an uncertainty component, the same one we use for the flexible ramp test, into the capacity test. And we have reported the results in the July monthly performance report. The last component is really targeting the load, exports, and wheeling priorities. That was quite of an interest for discussion how this would work. Given the timing of the implementation of this feature, we have not reported the performance for the month of July because it took effect until the early month of August. And we will be happy to provide a performance in a future opportunity. We also have implemented transparency enhancements, such as the 7-day outlook that is posted on the website, that provides a snapshot of the supply and demand conditions for the system in a horizon of up to 7 days. We have also posted adjustments to the load forecast so that participants can know in advance how the adjustments to the day-ahead forecast are taking place. We have also been providing in-depth analysis of the market performance on a monthly basis, and that is only for the summer months. We just have that discussion with the participants yesterday of how the performance was for the month of July. Next slide, please. With no doubt, the most critical date so far in the summer happens to be July 9. This is a day in the middle of the heat wave across the western U.S. It was not just an event in the CAISO area; it was a whole event across the western U.S. Concurrent with high loads, supply was tight, and it was further exacerbated with the loss of import supply from the Northwest interties. CAISO area eventually went into an EEA3 stage 2. At that time, we start arming load. We start releasing our operating reserves. We deploy up to 800 megawatts of reliability demand response. The market concurrently projected the need to reduce real-time exports up to 3,800 megawatts, and that happens to be in the most critical time of that evening. Eventually, around 9 p.m., CAISO came back out of this emergency, And CAISO area, as well as other balancing areas, went through this challenging day without the need to have any load outages. Next slide, please. One of the challenging conditions to manage on July 9th was the heavy derates on Malin and NOP interties. These are the two main interties from the northwest. And this illustration shows the intertie schedules for the CAISO area. Positive numbers are imports, negative numbers are exports equivalent to demand. The portion in purple that is at the top of the plot highlights the contribution of the supply coming from interties of Malin and NOP. And there is a blank exactly in our engine 17 that is highlighted in the square where we impose the derates on the system. We have to run a contingency run to take effect on those derates. And you can see how the purple area before and after changed dramatically. That is the loss of supply that we have in the system starting at that point in time. And if you compare with respect to the previous day, you can see how meaningful that loss of supply was. And that was effectively because of the impact of fires that we have in the northern part of the Malin area. The portion in green on the top is also the real-time transfers from the imbalance market. And you can see for most of the time, the CAISO receive import transfers through the EIM market, and that helps us to balance the demand on the system. Next slide, please. Another area of interest for the summer is the treatment of exports and wheels priorities. This illustrates the composition of exports for the CAISO area on July 9 and the neighboring dates. The different groups refer to the types of exports, including exports associated with existing transmission rights. The portion in green is the export component for wheels. A fair amount of wheel volume was from the northwest to the southwest. The portion in light blue is for exports that clear in the day-ahead market and they carry over to the real time. The area in gray is for those exports that came in directly and only in the real-time market as either self-schedules or economic bids. This is the type of exports that the market may not clear when supply is tight. This shows overall that through the market, a sizable amount of exports, including wheels, were able to clear successfully even on July 9. And most of that has to do with the current priorities that we have back in the month of July. Typically, the highest volume of clear exports happen in hours prior to the evening peak when solar production is still plentiful. As we go into the peak time, the exports naturally reduced. Next slide, please. Another component of the performance of the market in real time obviously has to do with the EIM market. This is a subset for the areas in the southwest of the system. And it is to highlight how EIM transfers can be very dynamic to capture real-time conditions. How one area can rely on EIM transfers at one point in time to meet its demand, while in other intervals it can provide supply to other areas, even in days when there is tight supply across the west. For instance, the transfers for the CAISO, and that is illustrated in the upper right plot, in this period involved over 9 different EIM areas. There were transfers happening with that many areas to bring or to send power out of the ISO. And possibly even more if we consider that there could be will-through EIM transfers. Similar dynamics happen for the Arizona and the Nevada EIM areas. This highlights the ability of the EIM market to leverage and maximize the supply capability across the EIM footprint. And it's a testament of the effectiveness of having this EIM working to achieve an optimal solution across the footprint. Thank you for your time. This is all what I have for this briefing. I will be happy to address any questions you may have.
This is Anna. Perhaps before we go to the question period, I just wanted to highlight, Guillermo did note that on July 9th, we, escaped or did not have the need for any load shedding activity here in California, in the California BAA, but also that was true of the EIM BAs as well. And I think this slide, the benefits that we saw in the intra-hour transfers and how the market was apportioning the resources, scheduling, as well as making sure that things moved throughout the hour was really impressive. And really, I just wanted to stress that out because I think this indicates one of the benefits the EIM market offers within the hour, intra-hour. And July 9th was a nice example of that.
Thank you, Anna. So before we go to the governing body for any questions or comments, are there any public comments about the EIM benefits? So let me see if there are any public comments.
As a reminder, if you'd like to make a comment and you're using the WebEx audio, you may enter the comment queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and your comment. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment. I do see one caller in the queue. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, yeah, this is Elaine Ginocchio from the Western Interstate Energy Board. Thank you for being able to take a question. It's a quick one. So CAISO implemented some temporary changes in their transmission priorities. This is the wheeling issue, which will be, they're looking at making more permanent changes next year. But when they implemented these changes, when did they implement these? Was that before July 9th or after?
It was after. It took effect on August 4th.
The changes went officially into place on August 4th.
So basically, the information you've shown us shows how everything operated under the transmission priorities before the changes, correct? The original ones?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Any other public comment?
I do not see any further callers in the queue as of now.
Can we return to the governing body? Any comments or questions from the governing body? Rob?
Thank you. Guillermo, Anna, thank you for presenting this information. It's terrific. It's very helpful. It generates a lot of good conversation in understanding how this works and the interplay. You made a comment that I had planned to emphasize, which is nothing beats the EIM like what you need during intra-hour. There is, we just don't have anything else really to rely on. And the EIM, in addition to being a great market tool, helps in times of distress and helps reduce that tremendously. I also want to give Guillermo, you a lot of credit, or you and your staff, for putting the information together. Visualization of all this information is always really challenging and difficult. And what do you present? And this has been done in a way which I think we can all understand, well, and be able to absorb. And I know you didn't cover some of the additional slides, but I also want to make certain that you understand that I really appreciate those additional slides that were included because they are very helpful in going through. I think it's really interesting as we look at, average pricing, but then we see some of these spikes that occur at different times. And understanding that better goes a very long way. And, that'll probably be left for another conversation. But having all this provided to us, I just am very grateful for, and I want you to know that we appreciate having access to it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Member Conzo, this is Elliot. I just want to respond to that really briefly. I really appreciate your recognition of that, and Guillermo and the team, they're doing a lot of work. We're just, in general, very interested and focused on continuing to increase transparency around our market, both sort of longer term looks and even short term. The new tools on our Outlook page with respect to capacity adequacy, I think are an important addition to the mix. Obviously, tools that can help folks in adjacent balancing authorities understand conditions on our system. We're going to continue to press those. And if you have any other ideas for us as you talk to stakeholders, please let us know, and we'll continue to look for additional opportunities. So thanks for the feedback.
Any other comments by the governing body members? I want to piggyback on Rob's comments for a minute, and that's something I really appreciated seeing in this presentation was the summer readiness table of what's been done, when did it go into place, and I can't help but think about all the things that have been done that are different than last year, and how many of those things in and of themselves have resolved some of what could have turned out differently, even though we didn't have the extreme weather, and I'll say yet. But just really, really well done, great responsiveness. I wish all our stakeholders could see that summer readiness table, because it really does, it's a very good visual articulation of how much work has gone on behind the scenes. And they're not all big things, some of them are small things, but they make such a big difference. So kudos to the CalISO staff for all their work on that. And I really like the way you're presenting the information, because we can use that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Obviously, Chair Decker, with change comes some uncertainty. We've been sensitive to that variable as well, but all of these initiatives are designed ultimately to address issues, and we look forward to getting some greater stability in place for some of the big issues from some of our partners. So thanks for the feedback. Definitely a lot of work on problem solving, and over time we're going to, I think some of the durable changes that we're going to be putting in place the next year will also help with managing some of the uncertainty. So thank you so much for the feedback.
So we are going to run over time. I'm going to hope that we can be done by 3:15, 3:20. And I'm going to just say now the informational reports are there. We're not going to really spend any time on those. But item number 9, in terms of the resource sufficiency, I think we do need to have that presentation. So Anna, Greg, and Eric, you're on.
Yes, and I will be really quick. I'll transfer over to Greg. I just did want to make a comment that this is really just an update as to where we are at with this initiative. Some important, developments we want to share with you all. But this is not yet done. I did want to thank the stakeholders. This has been a very important initiative over this past summer, and piggyback a little bit on what you said, Chair Decker, that these are changes we started as a result of trying to get ready for this summer, and made a commitment to continue to look into these issues regarding the sufficiency evaluation more deeply, and have some stuff to share with you today. And with that, I will go ahead and ask Greg to walk us through some of the information before you.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so, as Anna said, we're currently in the straw proposal phase of the initiative. We posted the straw proposal on August 25th, and the written stakeholder comments are due today. And as Elliot touched on in his CEO report, we have split this initiative into 2 phases. My update's going to really focus on the first phase of the enhancement, but the second phase we're going to include reconsidering the consequences for failing the test, and also whether to include operator load conformance adjustments into the resource sufficiency evaluation. We believe that splitting the initiative into 2 phases provides benefits. First, it provides time for stakeholders to assess how these initial set of enhancements are working and the impact of the changes on the EIM entities' test results, and it also allowed time to see how some upcoming market design enhancements like the flexible ramping product enhancements will impact the ISO's load conformance practices. Next slide, please. So in this first phase, we're proposing enhancements that are targeted at increasing the accuracy of the test, and these proposed enhancements are to date based on stakeholder input and include first, ensuring that the test only evaluates and counts capacity that is made available to the EIM for use. So this would include capacity that is either online in the hour under evaluation, or capacity that's made available to the EIM through the ISO's short-term unit commitment horizon. Next, we're also proposing some enhancements to ensure that only imports that have a high certainty of delivery are counted in the test. So we're looking at reducing import schedules that do not meet E-tag transmission profile tagging requirements. And then finally, we're also looking at ensuring that the evaluation is applied equitably between entities who base schedule and the ISO. In particular, we were looking at whether the balancing tests, which we currently do not apply to the ISO, should be applied to the ISO. At this point, we're proposing to continue to not apply the balancing test to the ISO. And largely because the ISO, we really don't think the ISO has the ability to strategically base schedule as EIM entities might have, and also the settlement for the ISO is on day-ahead awards, and we have convergence bidding in that the day-ahead market that drives that scheduling alignment. However, we are proposing that entities that are not exposed to the balancing tests, like the ISO, should not receive revenue from other entities that might fail that test. Next slide, please. And then finally, to address the resource efficiency evaluation, reporting, and transparency concerns, we're proposing that the Department of Market Monitoring assume all resource efficiency evaluation reporting and metric development. Sorry, I'm getting an echo here. Okay, so in doing so, it'll avoid the appearance of conflict with the ISO having oversight of the test, since the ISO itself is an EIM participant, and then we're proposing that DMN would report on all aspects of the resource efficiency evaluation. We think this is a natural fit because DMM already does a lot of this reporting on the resource efficiency evaluation as part of their review of the real-time market. We would also allow DMM to be in charge of development of the metrics, but the ISO would provide assistance in posting the DMM developed metrics. And then going forward, DMN would perform the quarterly EIM governing body updates. And then finally, the ISO is looking to provide additional data via our CMRI, which is our Customer Market Results Interface, on advisory and binding results. This will provide the benefit of allowing the entities to better engage with the test and be able to check their evaluation results. So, as was said, we plan to bring a final proposal to the EIM governing body in December, and now I will turn it over to Eric Hildebrandt to expand on the Department of Monitoring's role going forward.
Okay, great. This is Eric. So as Greg mentioned, we agreed and are looking forward to playing an expanded role in the monitoring and reporting of the resource efficiency test performance and the market design issues being considered right now. So we'll begin with special monthly reporting beginning this month in September. So we want to, be more timely in our reports and come out, shortly after the end of each month. This will provide quicker feedback on performance to stakeholders and the ISO and all parties. We'll also put additional information in our quarterly reports. In fact, we have one, I think, of those coming out next week. But again, those are, we've been doing that, but those are quarterly, so they're not as timely as the monthly reports that we'll do. And we'll work with, not just develop these ourselves, but work with stakeholders in the ISO on developing in reporting the metrics and the analysis. Stakeholders have already had, many suggestions as to what, they think is useful. So we've kind of incorporated that in our initial round of metrics, and we look forward to feedback on those and, further refining those. I think the idea is to standardize metrics for all the different balancing areas in the ISO. So it's kind of an apples-to-apples comparison across all the areas. We'd like to provide the detailed underlying data to participants. So this may, in the short run, may just be, some kind of special data files that we make available through the website. But in a longer-term basis, may be able to provide those through the ISO on a regular, more automated basis. And finally, we're starting off by showing metrics about the current test and how it's performing, but we're also actually already developing, I call it more analysis that would help assess the potential changes in how the requirements are being set and how the available supply might be calculated. So we've taken the ones being discussed in the stakeholder process as proposed by the ISO and maybe some other variations. You know, we could looking forward to maybe doing some sensitivity analysis on some of the details of the metrics being discussed. And finally, yeah, we look forward to providing more informational reporting to the Eim governing body, including quarterly reports out in these public meetings. So I'm glad to take any questions or comments.
Any comments or questions from the governing body?
This is John. Just a question for Greg, I guess, and maybe I missed this, but this is going to be done in 2 phases, and I assume it'll be phase 1 coming to us potentially in December. So what about phase 2 when you start getting into what you do, consequences? Do you have any idea how long that'll be?
Yeah, I think, you know, the idea is that once we get the phase 1 enhancements in, we would want to have, you know, a period of time to evaluate how those work. And I think at this point we're likely targeting the enhancements going in fall of next year. So we would be, you know, looking probably around a year later or so, we'd be looking at, you know, moving to phase 2 as to whether, you know, we wanted to make additional changes at that time.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
Any other comments or questions by the governing body? I would only say good work. Maybe not moving fast enough would be my comment. I realize it's in 2 phases, but I am concerned about all the comments we've heard about kind of the consequences and that's kind of out there a ways. But I do appreciate that the entity should also get a chance to see what the impact on them is more clearly than they may have been able to see previously. So I'm looking forward to the transparency. I'm very much looking forward to the DMM and its reporting on this process, and getting those reports and having that be transparent as well. Is there any public comment about the changes for the RS?
As a reminder, if you'd like to make a comment and you're using the WebEx audio, you may enter the comment queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and comment. I do not see any callers in the queue as of now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I have 2 things. One is we do have the informational reports in terms of our policy calendar, the quarterly budget, the stakeholder initiatives. I didn't have anyone raise their hand that they want to pull any of those out for discussion, so you have them in your packet. And for stakeholder information, we have been working on the governing body market expert. We are going to have a survey out for stakeholders. It's just a short one to give us a little bit of guidance. So you'll see that in the next week or so. It'll be open for a couple weeks. So appreciate everybody who stayed with us past the 3 o'clock agenda, and any other closing comments or issues or items for the governing body members. Thank you all. The meeting is adjourned.